Okay, there we go. Hi everyone, and welcome to NES. I'm the boomer that's going to talk to you guys about Svelte today. My name is Răzvan Plăcintar. I'm a tech lead here at NES, and I've accepted that I'm a boomer, not because all of my friends keep telling me that I am one, but actually because after working with React, Vue, Angular, and a bunch of other stuff from the dark ages of front-end development, when I had to learn something new, I was surprised by myself to actually, my initial reaction was something like, ah, man, like, not again, like, what can you do differently that every one of your competitors does? But actually, short spoiler alert, Svelte is really cool, and if you haven't gotten into it yet, I suggest you at least give it a try. So we're going to go through some of the steps that I went through when first getting into Svelte, and after which we're going to look at a small example app I've built, and we're going to actually try to recreate parts of it to see some of the syntax that Svelte has and some of the feature it brings. Now, the first thing I've done when getting into Svelte is actually to look up the meaning of the word Svelte, because if that doesn't say a lot about my English skills, I don't know what does. So actually, it turns out that after a quick Google search for Svelte meaning, Svelte means slender, slim, graceful, and elegant, and all of these descriptions are perfect for what Svelte is and does, and we'll see why in a couple of minutes. Now, the next thing I was curious about is who created Svelte, or who's backing it, because as we all know, React is backed by Facebook, Angular by Google, Vue by Asian dude who probably didn't want to become a doctor, and it turns out that its creator is Rich Harris. Now, this dude is a graphics editor at the New York Times, and apparently in his spare time he created Svelte and Rollup, if you've used it or heard about it. Okay, now the next question I wanted to answer was, what exactly is Svelte? So is it a library like React, a framework like Angular, or something in between, in my opinion, like Vue? And it turns out that it's neither. Basically, Svelte is a compiler. Now, that means that we're going to write code using its syntax, and afterwards Svelte will compile or transform our code into, and I quote, highly optimized imperative JavaScript. Now, Svelte also boasts that it doesn't have any runtime. So the perfect comparison would be React, that it will always embed the virtual DOM diffing algorithm in all of your apps. And basically, Svelte doesn't have anything like that. It just updates the DOM wherever it needs to. It doesn't have to, I don't know, do DOM diffing and other stuff like React. Well, okay, then having that said, since it's a compiler, there was an obvious question that needed to be answered, and the question was posed by Evan Yu. So he basically is asking that, okay, we're no longer writing JavaScript, right? You could call it Svelte script. Well, technically he's right. But once you get to work with Svelte, you're going to see that you're writing code just as you're used to. So you're still writing declarative code, you're still using components, and there are only 3 to 4 things that Svelte does differently, and namely it hijacks some normal JavaScript syntax, and it does some under-the-hood magic with it. But we're going to go through those, and after working for about 3 minutes with Svelte, you aren't going to be bothered by that anymore. Okay, the next thing we should answer is I'd like to know where or how Svelte compares with other frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue. And one way to do that would be to look at to-do MVC. I'm sure you all are aware of to-do MVC. Basically, it's the same app built using different frameworks or libraries, but I don't know, I don't really agree that that's a proper use case, because it's really a simple app, and apparently there's something better out there. It's called Conduit, and it's a Medium clone. Let me just show you. It's basically a more complex app. It's called Real World, and it's basically the same as to do MVC. You've got the same app built in different technologies, and you've also got different backends for it, so you can mix and match front ends and backends. And this is how the app looks right now. It has a lot more features than to do MVC. For example, you've got different URLs, you've got authorization in it, and you've got pagination, and basically it's everything that Medium does. Now, just a second, there. Okay, so the first thing we could compare would be bundle size, because Svelte boasts that it has no runtime. Then that would mean that the final app, the production built app, would be really small, right? And for the real world example app, it seems that this is true. As you can see, Svelte has just 9.7 kilobytes gzipped. And in comparison to other apps, you can see how big React is, or Vue, or AngularJS even. Now, this is a great feature because it opens up some new possibilities. And the first one would be that we can run our code on hardware that isn't so powerful. And I'm not referring here to mobiles, because it seems that there are a lot of POS machines in Brazil that are powered by a Svelte app. And that really says a lot, because those are, I don't know, lower-end machines with low hardware specifications. Okay, now the next thing we need to compare is performance, right? And I found some articles that did some comparisons. This is one of them. And what it did is basically run Lighthouse for a bunch of different frameworks. And as we all know, Lighthouse returns a score, and that score is based on a bunch of different things like time to first paint, time to first content paint, and time to CPU idle and whatnot. And as you can see, Svelte is somewhere around here in the middle, but as a rule of thumb, never trust anything you read on the internet. And well, I couldn't find any additional information related to how these tests were performed, or on what settings, on what machines, on what builds, or whatever. And let's just look at it right now. So this is the Conduit app built using React Redux, and I went ahead and ran Lighthouse on my machine on React, Angular, Vue, and Svelte. And as you can see, the performance score, taking these into account, the first contentful paint, first meaningful paint, so far and so forth, is 70. Let's switch over to Angular, it's 81. Great, let's switch over to Vue, and it's 83. Great, and now Svelte is like 99. Okay, I'm not sure if this is really relevant. I'll get back to this at the end. But yeah, these are the results right now. Let me switch back just a sec. Okay, and having this said, my next stop was actually getting my hands dirty with Svelte and maybe forming an opinion. And the result of that was that, in my opinion, Svelte messed up their logo. I think something like this would have been better, because whenever I started learning about Svelte and all of its features, I couldn't help but go like, this is cool, this is exactly like React. Oh look, this looks exactly like Angular. And oh, this is something from Vue. So yeah, but of course Svelte does something different, like it's a compiler and it builds it changes your code to imperative JavaScript, and sure, fair enough. I guess I'm okay with their logo. Okay, that's enough talk. Let's get our hands dirty. This is the part where Andre will probably stop me at some point, because I'll get a dubious error and I'll start going on Stack Overflow, and you know how it goes, right? When you start coding. So bear with me. Just a sec. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So as I've mentioned, I've built a small example app. This is it. It's called PMDB, the Pi movie database. Basically, I'm loading up a JSON of a list of movies. I can mark this as seen or not seen, and I can give it a better or worse rank or rate, and I can filter my list of movies, right? So it's a pretty simple app, but it goes through some of the features and syntax that Svelte has. So let's start rebuilding parts of it. So let me just open up the main.js file, and in this part, the first thing you see is that we're importing Svelte component files, and we're instantiating it and giving it a target where to attach itself. And after this is pretty similar to all of the other frameworks, and of course the first thing that comes to mind is the single file component, just like Vue. Let me open up my sandbox just a second. Okay, let me load this up, and as you can see, I don't have my two filtering buttons here, and we're going to go ahead and recreate them real quick. Let me open up my filter component, and let's take a look at what's inside. So just like in Vue, you've got three parts to your Svelte component. You've got a script part, the styles part, and the rest will be the template. The styles are, of course, scoped by default. You can make them global, but I'm going to leave them like this for now. And let's start adding some template, right? And we're going to add two buttons. Give it a text of all. Just add another button, right? Filtered for now, and the first thing we notice is that we don't need to wrap all of our template in a single DOM element. We can add as many as we want, and Svelte will render them. Okay, here are my two buttons, and the next thing I'd like to do is actually be able to toggle these. So for that, we're going to need some state, right? And I'm going to declare a variable. So selected button equals 0, for example. I'm going to use these cryptic indexes just for the fun of it. And that's how you declare some state. You don't need to do any this.setState or anything like that, like we've got in React, or we don't need to give it a data object or like we do in Vue. It's similar to Angular, where you just have your variables there. Okay, so let's try to output this state just so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to add a p tag, and we're going to output it just like this, right? So this is similar to React. Whatever is between the curly braces, it's regular JavaScript, and it will be compiled like that. Okay, so here's my 0 right now, and I'd like to change this one, right? So I need to add a listener. And we've got our directive for onClick, and we're going to give it a arrow function, right? Okay, my IDE is acting up, and selected button equals 0, right? And we're going to do the same thing for the second button. Bear with me. Okay, and we're going to give it 1, right? There we go. Hopefully nothing crashed. And if I'm going to click on all or filtered, you can see the text here changing. Now, I really hate that I'm using a 0 here, and we're going to use something else from Svelte. Basically, you've got computed properties. You can do something like this. And we'll get back to the syntax in just a second. Equals selected button equals 0, for example. If this is true, we're going to return all or filtered. Okay. No one told me I need to change this one. Thanks, guys. Okay, there we go. And if I'll switch between the two buttons, my text will be changed automatically based on the selected button. So it works exactly like a computed property. Now, actually, this is the first dubious thing that Svelte does by hijacking some valid JavaScript. And if you're not familiar with this syntax, that's okay. I wasn't either. It's called a labeled statement in JavaScript. And just to show you that it's valid, in developer.mozilla.org, you've got an example of labeled statement. So basically, you can give a label to each statement you want. And in this example, in the second statement, we can break to another statement using its label. And this is what Svelte does. Whenever it will encounter $sign and double, whatever, două puncte, colon, yeah. Okay, it knows it's a computed prop, or and it will treat it like such. Okay, great. Let's move forward. We're going to want to highlight,
so,
yeah.
Just to make it clear, it has a totally different functionality than the default
yes.
feature.
So yeah, it overwrites that syntax, and it does some magic under the hood for that.
So it's only used for computed properties? This syntax?
Yes, as far as I know, yeah. But you're going to see the $sign, because jQuery, that's how I like to see it. No, you're going to see this again in another part when using stores. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing I want to do is actually show which one of these buttons is selected, right? And I'm going to use a custom directive again that Svelte has. So it's a class binding, and I can give it the class name I want to bind it to, and I need something to evaluate between my two curly braces. So selected button is equal to 0. If this is true, then the active class will be added to the button. And I've got styling for these classes in my style part, but that's not really interesting. So, let me just copy this over to the second button as well, and there we go. Let's save it. And as you can see, The first button is selected by default because I'm initializing it with 0, and if I click on filtered, it's active, and we can switch or toggle between these two. Okay, great. Now we've seen how to have state, how we can have computed props, click handlers, other custom directives that it has. Now, one of the other things we need to see is how it handles props, because in my example, I don't want my state to be I don't know, for this component only. I want to update a state inside of its container so I can properly filter my list, right? Okay, so basically, I know some of you are gonna cringe, but it's this. You need to export your variable, and Svelte actually hijacks this as well. And whenever you export something from your script part, you're telling Svelte that this is a prop, and or a input like in Angular. Let's just save this one, and as you can see, this is still valid because I'm giving it a default in case I don't receive a prop from my parent. Now, the way you send props down to components is exactly like you would expect. You're just sending the variable name you declare in your child component. So it's selected button, it's equal to filter, and just to show that this works, I'm going to change my filter to 1. And as you can see, by default, the filter changed to filtered, and the list is filtered as well. So, but now I can't really toggle between these two, and because why? I'm not updating anything from my component. So to do that, we're going to need to trigger a custom element, right? A custom event. And for that, I need to import something from Svelte, but just a second.
Changing props basically doesn't re-render.
Well,
one-way flow.
Not exactly, because look, even though I'm sending, and this is something I'm not really okay with Svelte, but it does happen like this. I am sending my prop from the parent, and inside of it, I'm actually changing the prop. I'm still changing it, and it still reacts, right? Because as you can see, my button is selected. That's not really, yeah.
Sorry, what would happen if you change it from the parent? What would happen to the value stored locally?
Let's just check. So
I mean, if you change it from app, you change the property.
it should re-render. Yeah.
It just overrides the property.
Yes, it should, but there is some other feature in Svelte where you can actually bind to values inside of your component. So whenever, and do that automatically, whenever you change a value, so if I change selected button here, it would automatically update the selected button variable in its container. I'm not really okay with that either.
So that's basically two-way data binding.
It does, yeah, between components. So, and that's really easy to set up. But I don't know, it's a little, for me, it couples the code too much, and I'm not really okay with that. But hey, it's a personal thing. Okay, can I go on? Okay, so I need to import this one, just a sec. Okay, and I need to instantiate it. So basically, I need to create a new dispatch function, and using this one, I'm going to dispatch a custom event, right? So I'm going to name my event select, right? And I'm going to give it a payload, and that will be the index of the selected button. Okay, let's do the same thing in my second button. And I'm giving it a payload of 1, right? Okay, So now whenever I'll click the other button, the list will be filtered accordingly because I've set up my handler. So this is how you listen to a custom event. So you just add on and the name of the event you're dispatching from the child component, and you add a handler to it. Now I'm not doing anything special here. I receive an event and my payload is present in the event.detail attribute. Okay. Now, this was everything related to this component, but while I'm here, I'd still like to show you the double binding part, at least for native DOM elements. So let me just add a input here, and you've got another custom directive, bind value, and you need to give it the value you're binding to. And I'm going to bind to selected button, for example. Okay, because we are, let's just see how this works right now. Okay, I've got my input here, right, and it has the selected value added into it. And if I start modifying it, yeah, let me just add the text here real quick. I can do, this is another helpful thing from Svelte. I can do a computed prop that actually renders my value, so it's easier to debug. So let's just open this up, and as you can see, I've got my 1 printed in the console, and if I start changing this to whatever, as you can see, the value is actually updated, the selected button, right? So this is double binding for DOM elements with the custom directive. Okay, let me just close this up to have more space. Let's move forward to the next stage with other features. I'll move over to stage 2, and we should have an, oh yeah, there we go. Everything's empty, and I'm going to want to render my list of movies, right? Just to get a feel of how the templating works. Just to run you through the code, I've got a movie stub, I've got a movie state to show different things, and a loading flag, and a method that returns a promise. Bear with me, I'll close the style part. And the first thing we want to do, right, is to render our list of movies. So let's do that. Svelte has a each. Well, this is the syntax for rendering lists, and I'm going to want to render my movies stub, and this is another part that's interesting or quirky related to Svelte. Of course, as we're all used to, we're going to get our movie here, right, and the index. Now this is the weird part, because the key, it's not handled like in any other framework. You have to add a space here, and in between parentheses you need to give it a key, and Svelte will automatically know how to treat this. It's a little bit weird, but you get used to it, or at least it's weird for me. Now, okay, having that said, let's render our card. Okay, and see how it goes. There we go. We're rendering our 2 cards, right? Okay, this is the each part. Now, it has some support for something I haven't seen. Maybe there is support in other frameworks, but I haven't seen it. It has support for an else block. That's logical, right? In your each, you've got an else, and you can render whatever you want. Here, I'm going to render a P saying no movies, right? And this will be rendered whenever I'm whenever either this is undeclared or null or whatnot, or if it's an array for real, its length is 0. So I'll try to render my movies state, since that's a empty array, and I should get no movies. It comes in handy, sure. Okay, and it changed because of my promise. Bear with me. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is actually add a loading spinner, right? And I'll have to do that using an if. And Svelte has that as well, a if block. Let me just remove this one as a if else, right? And I'm going to move this entire part in the else, because if it's loading, then I want to render my spinner component. Right? Okay, let me just format this a bit. Good enough. There we go. And as you can see, I've got my spinner showing up for 3 seconds because I'm loading a promise here. And after 3 seconds, I'm getting my list rendered. Okay, now there is something else useful from Svelte that I'm not sure is present anywhere else, not that I know of anyway. It has a await support, so I can go something like this. It looks like this, and if it's, I'm going to need to give it a promise, and while that promise is loading, it will render the first part, right? And I'm going to want to render my loading spinner as well in this part, and if it's successful, I'm going to want to render my list of movies, right? And if my promise failed, I'm going to want to render error. Okay, let's give it a try. As you can see, the spinner is loading for 3 seconds, because that's how long I've added the timeout for. After that, I'm rendering my list. Now, let's see what happens if I reject my promise after 3 seconds. Again, the loading spinner, and after that, I've got my error to show up. Okay, let's switch back to it. Now, let's see some other features, something that we're already used to, slots, for example. I've got a layout component set up previously, and as you can see, slots are exactly how you're used to from other frameworks. You're adding a slot element and you're giving either it a name, this is a name slot, or you've got your default slot that doesn't have a name. Now let's actually use the layout component and try to add some elements inside of it. So I'm going to create a container div and give it a slot equals header, for example, and inside of it I'm rendering my header component. Okay, and let's just move all of this inside of my layout as well, and this will mean that it will render it in the default slot. Let's see how it looks. As you can see, my header has been added, and let's see at how the DOM looks real quick. Here's my layout, and this is my container div that it has a slot attribute inside, and inside of it you can see my header component. Okay, and everything else is of course in the main element, just like in my template. Okay, now there's one thing I'm not really happy, or maybe this is the second thing I'm not happy about, that it doesn't really have support yet to add this slot directly to the component because it would fail, and you need to wrap it inside of a native HTML element for now. Hopefully this will be changed. It's picking on my brain. Anyway. Okay, another thing we need to do, of course, we're not going to launch our promises directly in our scripts, right? We're going to need to launch it from lifecycle hooks, and one of them is onMount. You can import it from Svelte, and to use it, we're going to call it, and we need to give it a callback. So we're going to give it a normal arrow function, right? And we're going to move this part. Actually, if I move it completely, it will probably fail, but I'll try to do it like this. Promise, yeah, let's change this one up and try it like this. If this fails, I'll silently move forward. So, okay, I'll silently move forward.
Remove the finally, the next line.
Great, I was testing you. Okay. Okay, so we've seen lifecycle hooks as well. Now I'll move to the main part of the application. Let me just remove the sandbox part. The last things I want to show you guys is that it has a store of its own. So let me just open it up. There are three types of stores. You've got a writable store, a readable store, and a I'm forgetting its name. A store that depends on other stores. It's something like a computed prop, but for stores. Now, as you can see, I'm instantiating a writable store right here, and basically I'm getting back a object that has three methods: a subscribe, a set, and a update. When you need to subscribe to it to get updates, and you can set the information which overwrites everything in your store, and you can update the state as well. And whenever you're going to call update, you're going to receive the state of the store, and you can of course create new objects and new arrays and return them so that the store will update itself. Now as you can see, let me just open up app.svelte. There are two ways to use the store, right? You can either subscribe to it, and whenever you subscribe, you're going to always get updates. And when you're getting updates, you can update your local store. Now I'm updating my local store because I've got a computed prop that filters through it. There's another way you can use stores, and that's directly in the template. So let me just comment this out for a bit. Get my each part, and so right now I'm going through my filtered movies, but actually I want to go through the object that I'm importing, so the actual store. And I can do that if I add a $sign again. And okay, as you can see, I've got all of my movies here, and I'm just using the store with a $. Here. Now this is similar to me with Angular and what it does with observables and RxJS. And it's a shorthand, and the upside to this is that it automatically subscribes, re-renders when new data comes in, and whenever the component is destroyed, it will automatically unsubscribe. If not, you are going to need to unsubscribe manually, and whenever you subscribe, you're going to get a reference to a method to a unsubscribe. So the correct code would have been this one on my part. Okay, and you would need to call the unsubscribe method. Okay. Another feature that Svelte has, so let me just get back to normal with this, okay. It has some transitions and animation support. And to do that, let me open up my card component. And to do that, again, okay, bear with me. There we go. So you can import a lot of things from Svelte transitions and animations. I've imported two of them, fly and fade, and let's see how we can use these. Again, you need to add these to native DOM elements. You can't add them to components yet. I'm not sure if this will change or not in the future. And as you can see, these are just custom directives that you add, and you can actually configure them. So on the out.fly, for example, I'm giving it a position where to fly to and a duration, right? So whenever I'm in my filtered movies, whenever I click I've seen this one, it will fly to the right. And if I'm going back to the all part, you'll see them fade in, right? Okay, this is a cool feature in my opinion, and it's really easy to use. There's one more thing I'd like to show you. I'm sorry if this is really long. I'm not sure if you guys have been to the previous presentation when Andre went through the memoization in React and why we need to do that. I've tried to recreate the app to be similar to what Andre set up, to try to give it, to have a comparison. Let me just start to clean these up and open up my main. And sandbox stage 3, right? Okay, it renders like before, but as you can see, I've got I think 1,000 movies or something like that. And another thing we need to see is if we inspect this span, we're going to see that it's 10 levels deep, right? This is similar to what Andre set up in the previous presentation. And if you remember, whenever he started interacting with the app, it would go slowly because it would constantly check all of the elements, do the virtual DOM diffing, and it would slow up our app because we didn't optimize it. But it seems that Svelte keeps true to its word. It actually updates only the specific element that changed, and it doesn't need to do any other diffing or stuff like that. So as you can see, the app is responsive. That was everything for the presentation related to the code part. There is, well, for the community and ecosystem part, it's not as big as React or Vue or Angular, of course, but it's growing. And the first thing that's a downer for now, there is no TypeScript support. But from what I understood, Rich Harris is actually working on this, and hopefully it will land soon. For unit tests, I've seen it working with Jest, and there are other things that are lacking. For example, routers. There is Sapper.js, which is an entirely an entire framework on top of Svelte. It's basically the Gatsby for Svelte. And this is actively maintained and developed by Rich Harris. That's great. But the other alternatives are community built, so they will have support as long as those dudes have time. So, but yeah, they are functional and you can use them. For component libraries, again, there's nothing backed by anyone who can inspire, I don't know, trust. They're built by dudes who, again, will maintain those libraries until they have time, probably. But yeah, you do have Swelma, which is Bulma, Smelt, which is Material UI, Sweltstrap, which is Bootstrap, whatever, take your pick. You've got stores and or state management. You've got integration with GraphQL. You can use observables, MobX, or Redux Connect if that's your preference. And it doesn't have a CLI, so to speak of, but you can create your project using a template, and it will set up everything using rollup. And actually, the project I've built is using that template, and it fulfilled all of my necessities. And I think that was it. Thank you. Does anyone have questions or comments?
Besides the enhanced performance that it appears to bring, how would you describe the developer experience with it?
I personally love it. Its learning curve is literally non-existent, at least not in my case. I just felt that I just picked it up and I started developing right away, just because of the fact that it's really similar to all of the other frameworks, and it doesn't do too much stuff differently. There are a few things I'm not really okay with. One of them would be the state and binding thing, and another one, they boast that about the fact that having your styles in your components means that, and they're compiled, means that it will automatically remove unused styles, and that's great. But actually, I tried to use CSS variables, and you know how you need to declare your CSS variables at the root level with semicolon root, and I couldn't use those CSS variables in my component, and I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that it says, look at your CSS variables, but we are not using them anywhere, and it removed them, you know, and I couldn't use them. And these are things that, okay, fair enough, okay, but you need to fix it, and it's some of the stuff that still makes me think that Svelte is at the beginning of its life, so to speak. But other than that, yeah, I do recommend it.
How's the debugging? You said that in your each, for instance, you need to add a space, then give it a key, and a space is something that I'm likely to forget.
Yeah, well, as you've seen my code, I've installed Svelte snippets in my VS Code, and that's really helpful. And related to debugging, I've seen that they have developer tools. I'm not sure if I have it installed on my laptop, but I have them at home, and they're really great. They do exactly what you'd expect them to do, not like augury. I'm sorry, I just hate that. Okay. Yeah.
I wonder what's the output of Svelte component. Is it actually a web component with Shutterdown or anything?
No.
Just like
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Actually, let me just open up Svelte. I can show you this as well. So on their side, they've got a REPL, redevel, print, and loop. There we go. Okay, and we can actually start working with this. Let's just try to see. Okay, to answer your question, I'm going to inspect my app. Let's just see. But I'd like to make another point after that. Okay, so basically, it's not a web component like Angular does it. It just spits your template there. As you can see, I've got my two buttons here, and this actually is a container from its parent, but this is the filter component, right? So let me close everything. Okay. Yeah, I'm giving it a container here for various reasons, but this is my filter component. So yeah, it's just normal, nothing fancy. Okay, let's get back to the REPL. Let's take a look at, if you guys can still wait a couple of minutes, let's add this one to a date.now. Okay, and add a button. And add a click handler. And name equals date.now. Okay, there we go. Now we actually, in this tool that they provide, we can look at the JS output and we can actually see how a Svelte component looks compiled. So the actual JavaScript that's responsible for everything you can see here. And as you can see, I've got a button variable T1, H1, T2, T3, T4. And these are actually the white space from everything I'm adding here. So if I were to remove this part, some of the variables should disappear. Yeah. And there's a white space here, so this will probably be another variable. Nope, I'm wrong. Okay, but you should have seen it here that it disappeared. So basically you're creating Svelte creates all of your elements and setting the text, and it would be interesting to see how Svelte verifies whenever something changes, or how does it know, and I think it's somewhere down here. And as you can see in your click handler, everything it's doing is actually invalidating a state inside of it. So after that, it will know what to overwrite or to update in your DOM. So from my point of view, this is really simple. Okay, but I don't know, I have a thing whenever I'm debugging or looking through their source code. I'm impressed whenever I see something simple or easily done, instead of having, I don't know, have to go through a lot of methods in call stacks and whatnot.
This is the final output?
Uncompressed, unminified.
Yeah, but I was under the impression that it outputs plain.js after like 10-15 lines of importing stuff from internal.
Well,
So that's something when you run it. It's not only plain.js.
Yeah. Well, no, it does have some runtime. Of course, it's not completely true that the runtime isn't there. It does have some, but it's significantly less than any other.
I was under the impression that it just outputs plain.js without anything at all.
Yeah, it does have some logic there. So.
And event listener and stuff.
Yeah.
And DOM manipulation.
Yeah, I thought that's what it does.
I thought so too.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm assuming it outputs some source maps, right? For
Yes.
debugging experience.
Yes. And that is done automatically. I think I've already built my app. Let me just see. This is the. Okay, but I'm not sure when I built it last. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is the entire code for my app. Sandbox stage 3, yeah, it's bundling everything. Okay.
If you start a project tomorrow, would you use it? The element of React, Vue, Angular?
Depends on the project. If it's a POC and I know it will die in 6 months or something, then yeah, sure. If not, and I'm not sure if how many about the number of people who are going to be working on it. I really like Svelte, but I'm not confident it's mature enough right now. But yeah, for something simple, POC-ish, yeah, no doubt.
What's the biggest application you want to do Svelte?
This one. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm going to attach my slides if anyone wants to see them, and this is the link to the application I've built in case you want to check it out. Thank you everyone, and enjoy the next talk.
Luăm o scurtă pauză. Nu uitați, vă rog, feedback-ul, important pentru feedback, da? Vă rog. O să mai pun din nou link-ul către...
Îți dau ăsta.
Da, mersi.
Curent vrei?
Nu. Da.
Da, este aici un prelungitor.
Putem să lăsăm așa,